17 giant stone heads are sitting in the jungles and museums of Mexico right now, each one carved from a single boulder of volcanic basalt. Each one weighing somewhere between 8 and 50 tons. Each one moved more than 150 kilometers without wheels, without metal tools, without horses or oxen, by people living over 3,000 years ago. And, until very recently, nobody could fully explain how they did it, why they did it, or who exactly was staring back at us from inside those massive stones. Then modern scanning technology and artificial intelligence started looking at these heads in ways no human eye ever could before. And what came back from those scans, what the data is showing researchers today in 2026, is forcing one of the biggest re-examinations of early American civilization that archaeology has seen in decades. This is not a mystery story built on speculation. This is built on hard data, real scans, peer-reviewed findings, and the kind of ancient engineering achievement that gets more impressive the closer you look at it. Stay until the very end, because the final piece of what these heads reveal about the Olmec civilization is the part that almost nobody is talking about clearly. Subscribe right now, because this channel brings you the biggest stories in ancient history and modern science, explained in plain, honest language. And drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. People are joining from every corner of the world, and I want to hear from you. Now let us start with the discovery that changed everything about how we look at these stones. In a survey published by the University of Arizona, archaeologist Takeshi Inomata led a team that used LiDAR, light detection and ranging technology, to fly over the entire region of Tabasco and southern Veracruz in Mexico. LiDAR uses pulsed laser beams fired from aircraft that penetrate tree cover and map everything on the ground beneath in precise three-dimensional detail. Things that have been invisible under jungle canopy for centuries show up as clear geometric shapes in the LiDAR data. And what this survey found was extraordinary. It identified 478 ancient ceremonial centers spread across the Olmec and Maya heartland, centers that nobody had known existed, buried under forest and farmland for over 2,000 years. The study was published in the journal Nature Human Behavior, and it represented the largest remote sensing survey of ancient Mesoamerica ever conducted. Among those 478 sites, the LiDAR revealed something specifically striking at San Lorenzo, the earliest and most powerful Olmec capital. A massive rectangular earthen ceremonial space, measuring roughly 1,000 meters long by 275 meters wide, was identified at San Lorenzo that no researcher had mapped before. 20 platforms sit arranged around the edge of this space, slightly elevated above the central plaza floor. Inomata described it as a place where large numbers of people could have gathered for large-scale ceremonies, with the surrounding platforms possibly serving as gathering points for elite residents or ritual participants. This is not a small find. This is a previously unknown large-scale ceremonial infrastructure at the most important early Olmec site, sitting undetected under the surface until a laser flying overhead finally revealed it. And it changes the picture of just how organized and ambitious Olmec society was from its very earliest period. Now, let us talk about the heads themselves, because this is where the story gets genuinely astonishing. 17 colossal heads have been confirmed so far. 10 at San Lorenzo, 4 at La Venta, 1 at Tres Zapotes, and 2 at Laguna de los Cheros. They range in height from 1.17 meters to 3.4 meters, almost as tall as a one-story building. They range in weight from roughly 8 tons to estimates of over 40 tons for the largest examples, and every single one of them was carved from basalt, a dense, hard volcanic rock quarried from the Sierra de los Tuxtla Mountains in the Veracruz highlands. The quarry sites are confirmed to be more than 150 kilometers, nearly 100 miles, from the main Olmec ceremonial centers where the heads now sit. Stop and think about that distance for a moment. The Olmecs had no wheels. This is confirmed archaeologically. There is no evidence of wheeled vehicles in use for practical transport in Olmec Mesoamerica. They had no horses, no oxen, no large domesticated draft animals strong enough to pull massive loads. They had no iron or bronze tools, only stone and bone implements for carving. And yet, they managed to identify specific basalt outcrops in the mountains, more than 150 kilometers away, quarry boulders that weighed anywhere from 8 to over 40 tons, move those boulders out of the mountains, transport them across rivers, coastal wetlands, and jungle terrain, and deliver them to their ceremonial centers, where they were then carved with extraordinary precision and placed in deliberate arrangements. The current scientific consensus among archaeologists is that the Olmecs most likely used a combination of methods, including large wooden rafts floated along the rivers that run from the Tuxtla Mountains toward the coast and the Gulf lowlands, and then rolling the stones on logs across land once they reached flatter terrain. Hundreds, possibly thousands of coordinated workers would have been required for each stone. The organizational capacity implied by this process alone tells you that Olmec society was not a loose collection of villages. It was a hierarchically organized, centrally directed civilization with the ability to mobilize enormous labor forces across complex multi-stage logistics operations. Now here is what modern technology is revealing about the heads in ways that direct visual examination never could. Researchers have been applying structured light scanning and laser mapping to create complete, precise, three-dimensional digital models of the sculptures, both exterior surfaces and, through ground-penetrating scanning methods, the subsurface structure of the stone itself. These scans have produced findings that are genuinely surprising to specialists who have studied these monuments for their entire careers. The surfaces of the heads, when scanned at extremely high resolution, show carving marks that are consistent and precise in ways that simply cannot be appreciated by walking up to a 3-meter-tall stone face and looking at it. The regularity of the tool marks, the depth and spacing of cuts in areas like the mouth, eyelids, and cheekbones suggest a level of controlled, systematic carving using stone tools that required not just skill, but a highly organized production process, with different craftspeople likely handling different stages and aspects of the carving. The facial features themselves have been a source of controversy and debate for over a century, ever since the first head was discovered at Tres Zapotes in 1862 by José María Melgar y Serrano. When Melgar first reported the discovery, he described the facial features as appearing to belong to what he called a Negro race. That interpretation sparked a debate that has never fully gone away. Some writers in the 20th century, including Ivan van Sertima in his 1976 book, They Came Before Columbus, argued that the broad noses, thick lips, and specific facial proportions of the carved heads were evidence of pre-Columbian African contact with Mesoamerica, specifically from ancient African maritime voyages that brought Africans to Mexico before European contact. This theory captured popular imagination for decades, but the scientific evidence does not support it. The mitochondrial DNA analysis of actual Olmec human remains, carried out in 2018 on 2 individuals, one from San Lorenzo and one from Loma del Zapote, found that both individuals belonged to mitochondrial haplogroup A. Haplogroup A is the most abundant of the 5 mitochondrial haplogroups characteristic of indigenous populations of the Americas. It is found in very high frequencies in Native American groups from North, Central, and South America. It has nothing to do with African genetic origins. The haplogroup associated with sub-Saharan African ancestry is haplogroup L. None of the Olmec individuals tested showed haplogroup L. UNAM archaeologist Ann Cyphers, who has spent decades excavating San Lorenzo and studying Olmec remains, stated plainly that the DNA studies confirm the Olmecs belong to one of the most abundant genetic groups among the founding populations and indigenous people of the Americas. There were no African artifacts found in Olmec archaeological contexts, no African skeletal remains, no African origin DNA. The debate was settled by the biology. The facial features on the colossal heads, the flat noses and full lips that struck early observers as unusual, are in fact within the normal range of indigenous Mesoamerican phenotypes. These are exactly the kinds of features that are, as confirmed by physical anthropologists who study the region, still common today among people living in Tabasco and Veracruz, which is where the Olmec heartland was located. When you carve a face at 3 times life size from volcanic rock, using stone tools and create the exaggerated contours required to convey expression at that scale, certain features get amplified in ways that may look dramatic up close, but are simply the natural consequence of monumental scale portraiture. What the high-resolution scans are confirming is that these faces were individualized portraits. Each head has a distinctly different face, different bone structure, different expression, different proportions in the eyes, the mouth, the nose, the cheeks. The scholars who have studied them most carefully describe them as real portraits of real individual Olmec rulers, not generic representations of a type, but specific likenesses of specific people, recognizable to their contemporaries in the same way that a photographic portrait would be recognizable today. Each head also wears a distinctive helmet or headdress. The helmets differ between individuals and are thought to be either actual battle helmets worn in warfare or the protective headgear worn by players in the Mesoamerican ballgame, or possibly both. The ball game was not entertainment in the modern sense. It was a ritual, a sacred enactment of cosmic forces, potentially the struggle between life and death, between opposing spiritual powers. The rubber balls, found at the El Manatee site, dating to around 1500 BCE, are among the oldest known rubber artifacts in the world. The Olmec word in the Nahuatl language means rubber people, the name given to them by later civilizations, because of the rubber they produced from the latex-rich trees of their coastal lowland environment. The fact that the colossal heads appear to wear ballgame helmets links the identity of the rulers they depict to this sacred activity, suggesting that these individuals were not just political leaders, but ritual figures who embodied the spiritual authority of their society. The placement of the heads was also deliberate in ways that the LiDAR surveys are helping researchers understand more fully. At La Venta, 4 colossal heads were arranged around the sacred city center, 3 at the northern end and 1 at the southern end, all facing outward. This arrangement is now understood as a symbolic guarding of the ceremonial core, the stone faces of past rulers watching over the sacred space from all directions. At San Lorenzo, the positioning of the heads, relative to the newly discovered rectangular ceremonial plaza, revealed by LiDAR, raises questions about how the entire site was organized as a unified sacred landscape, with the carved portraits of rulers as permanent anchors in a carefully designed spatial and ritual geography. These were not objects placed randomly. They were components of a planned environment designed to communicate specific messages about power, ancestry, and sacred order to everyone who moved through that space. Many of the heads at San Lorenzo were buried before 900 BCE, and some were deliberately damaged before burial. Faces were defaced, specific features broken. This was almost certainly not random vandalism. The most compelling interpretation among archaeologists is that this was a deliberate ritual decommissioning of the monuments, either when a ruler died and the political landscape shifted, or when a new ruling dynasty came to power and chose to neutralize the symbolic authority of the previous dynasty's carved portraits. The power embedded in these objects was considered real and active enough that it had to be consciously, deliberately canceled before the stones could be removed from the visible landscape. That tells you something profound about how the Olmec understood the relationship between a carved image and the living spiritual force of the person it represented. Now, let us talk about what the Olmec civilization actually achieved, because this is the part that deserves far more attention than the mystery and the speculation that surrounds these heads. The Olmec are considered by most archaeologists to be the first major civilization in Mesoamerica. Their influence on every civilization that came after them in the region is so profound that scholars sometimes describe them as the mother culture of Mesoamerica. The Maya, the Zapotec, the Toltec, the Aztec, all of them built on foundations that the Olmec laid. And when you look at what those foundations actually were, the scale of the contribution becomes genuinely astonishing. The Olmec developed some of the earliest known examples of proto-writing in Mesoamerica. Symbols found on stone monuments and portable objects at Olmec sites share structural features with later fully developed writing systems, including Mayan hieroglyphics and the Isthmian script, which is one of the earliest confirmed writing systems in the Americas. They developed calendar systems. Evidence from Olmec sites shows early versions of the ritual calendar and long count calendar concepts that the Maya would later develop into the most sophisticated pre-Columbian timekeeping system in the world. They invented the Mesoamerican ball game, or at least formalized and codified it to such a degree that it spread across the entire region. The rubber balls confirmed at El Manatee predate any other known rubber artifacts in the Americas. The Olmec built cities. La Venta, which flourished from around 800 to 400 BCE after San Lorenzo's decline, was laid out along a precise north to south axis, offset about 8 degrees from true north, which some researchers have connected to astronomical alignments, possibly the position of the Pleiades star cluster at the time of the city's construction. La Venta had earthen pyramid mounds, ceremonial plazas, workshops for jade and greenstone carving, residences for elite members of society, and an elaborate system of drainage canals. At the center of La Venta stands a large earthen mound roughly 30 meters high that may contain the tomb of a great Olmec ruler, a tomb that has never been fully excavated. The logistics of building this city in a swampy, river-threaded coastal landscape, without metal tools or wheeled transport, required exactly the same kind of large-scale organized labor that produced the colossal heads. The Olmec were also masters of jade. They traded for jade from sources hundreds of kilometers away in Guatemala and crafted it into figurines, masks, and ritual objects of extraordinary technical and artistic quality. Jade in Mesoamerican cultures was not decorative. It was sacred. It represented breath, life, and royal power. The ability to obtain jade from distant sources and transform it into finished objects of this quality indicates both long-distance trade networks and a specialized artisan class working within a hierarchically organized society that could support craft specialization at a high level. What the combination of LiDAR surveys, high-resolution scanning technology, and careful systematic archaeology is revealing in 2025 and 2026 is that the Olmec were even more sophisticated and even more influential than previous generations of researchers had understood. The 478 ceremonial centers identified by the LiDAR survey, all sharing a consistent rectangular plaza design derived from the San Lorenzo template, show that Olmec ideas about sacred space and ceremonial architecture spread across an enormous geographic area and were adopted and replicated by cultures from the Gulf Coast to the highlands of Chiapas and beyond. This was not just a local civilization. It was a civilizational template that seeded the entire subsequent history of Mesoamerica. And the colossal heads sit at the center of this story, not as mysteries pointing to lost civilizations or ancient contacts with distant peoples, but as exactly what they appear to be when examined with the full weight of modern evidence. They are monuments to power, real portraits of real rulers, created by a people of extraordinary organizational capacity and artistic skill, moved across impossible distances through collective human effort on a scale that still staggers the modern mind, placed in deliberate arrangements designed to organize sacred space and project political authority, and buried, when the time came, with the same deliberate care with which they had been created, because these were not just stones. They were the faces of the men who had built the world's first civilization in the Americas. And even buried under meters of Mexican soil for 3,000 years, those faces kept watching, waiting for the moment when someone would finally come back with the right tools and the right questions to understand what they were actually saying. We now have those tools. And what the scanning technology and the LiDAR surveys and the DNA analysis and the decades of careful excavation are all saying together is this: the Olmec were extraordinary, not because they were connected to something supernatural or alien, but because they were human. Because they looked at a basalt boulder in the mountains, imagined a face inside it, and figured out how to get it 150 kilometers to where they wanted it. Because they built cities in swamps. Because they laid the foundations on which the Maya built their calendar and the Aztec built their empire. Because they looked at their rulers and believed those faces deserved to last forever. And they were right. Those faces are still here, and they are still telling their story to anyone willing to look carefully enough to hear it. If this kind of deep, evidence-first history is what you come here for, share this video right now with someone who needs to know how remarkable the ancient Americas actually were. Drop a comment below telling me what part of the Olmec story hit you hardest. Was it the engineering, the DNA, the LiDAR discoveries, the way they buried their king's portraits to cancel their power? Tell me what got you, and I will see you in the next one.